So think about Sisyphus for a second, the ultimate tragic symbol of just like eternal, agonizing struggle.
Right, the guy pushing the rock.
Exactly. The doomed king at the incredibly steep hill, the massive stone that always rolls back to the bottom right as he reaches the peak.
Right, right.
We are all taught this myth. It's supposed to be this grand existential metaphor for the human condition, right?
Yeah, the futility of life, basically.
Exactly. But what if it wasn't? What if it wasn't a profound philosophical reality at all? Because today, for this deep dive, we are looking at something wild.
It is wild. It completely changes everything.
Yeah, it's a 2,731-year-old legal document, and it essentially proves that the greatest, most terrifying mythological punishment in human history wasn't a divine curse. It was a clerical error.
I mean, it completely shatters the illusion of divine infallibility. It just breaks it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the source material here is it's unbelievable.
It really is. So we are digging into this remarkable historical and, procedural record. It's known as the Zyloth Diaries, the case of the rolling boulder.
Great. And I want to establish the reality of this text for you immediately because it sounds made up.
Yeah, we have to be clear. This is not some modern retelling. It's not a thought experiment cooked up in some university philosophy department.
Like some satire piece.
Exactly. We are examining the actual documented transcripts and procedural notes from a literal legal case.
Spearheaded by this Martian advocate named Zyloth.
Right, who took Sisyphus's case pro bono in a Martian legal forum.
Which is Zyloth is such a fascinating figure to anchor this whole historical event because he isn't some bleeding heart savior, right?
Not at all.
He didn't just swoop in out of pity for a mortal. He literally describes himself as an advocate with an unusually high pain threshold for institutional stupidity.
Which is just a great way to describe a lawyer.
It's amazing. And he explicitly warns against getting sentimental about Sisyphus. Because, sentiment makes you imprecise.
Right. He is basically a legal surgeon. He's cold, he's methodical. Zyloth takes on these massive pro bono matters only when he detects a very specific kind of systemic arrogance.
Like a structural flaw.
Exactly. Yeah. He talks about monitoring for the, what does he call it, the sound in the data.
The sound in the data, yeah.
By that, he means the distinct, almost structural noise produced when absolute power operates with zero self-reflection.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Zyloth has this fundamental operating principle. Basically, if a powerful institution claims its authority is so overwhelming and obvious that it doesn't need to prove it, then its underlying paperwork is almost certainly garbage.
Because they've never been checked. He literally says in the text, I'm not a charity. He says, I take those cases because I like a good challenge, because arrogance deserves cross-examination.
And Sisyphus was just the perfect storm for this kind of legal dismantling.
Oh, totally. You have this guy who has been turned into a symbol of utter futility. But the real issue wasn't the human condition. It was that his punishment was procedurally vague.
Very vague.
It was physically hazardous, and it was defended by a divine entourage that, frankly, possessed the collective self-awareness of a polished rock.
Right. Polished marble. But that brings up the obvious question, right? How does a Martian advocate even get the Olympian gods into a courtroom?
Yeah, because they're gods. The Olympians claimed universal metaphysical jurisdiction. They literally rule the earth, the sky, the underworld. So how do you subpoena a god?
Well, that is exactly the vulnerability that Zyloth exploited. He used a legal concept known as review by claimed reach.
Review by claimed reach. Okay, what does that actually mean in plain English?
So the Olympian Tartarian Enforcement Authority, they essentially stated that their word was final across all boundaries.
Right. Life, death, the mortal realm, everything.
Everything. So Zyloth's logic, which the Martian Forum completely adopted, was devastatingly simple. He said, if an authority claims its punishment is eternal and binds a subject across universal boundaries,
then that authority is voluntarily placing its dispute beyond local immunity.
Exactly. You just nailed it.
Because you can't have it both ways, right?
Yeah.
They can't, claim your power applies everywhere in the entire universe, but then tell an outside court, oh, you don't have the authority to look at my documents.
Precisely. That's the trap. If your power crosses boundaries, the scrutiny of that power must also be allowed to cross boundaries.
That makes perfect sense.
You cannot claim universal reach and then suddenly retreat behind the walls of your local prestige when a clerk simply asks to see your filing address.
And the Greek delegation was furious about this, weren't they?
Oh, they were livid.
Yeah.
They tried to lean heavily on the sacred, untouchable prestige of Mount Olympus to just dismiss the Martian Forum entirely.
Do you know who we are?
Basically, yeah. They argued that Mount Olympus is the seat of ultimate authority. End of story. We don't have to listen to you.
And the Martian Forum's response to that is easily one of the most petty but legally binding bureaucratic checkmates I've ever seen in recorded history.
It's so funny. They invoke something called the comparative Olympus rule.
Yes. The Greek delegation is throwing their weight around, and the Martian court just simply points out the math.
Right. The Greek Mount Olympus is, what, about 2.9 kilometers tall?
Yeah, even if you are incredibly generous and measure it with what the text calls heroic posture.
Right, heroic posture. But the Martian trial was convened on Olympus Mons.
Which is roughly 22 kilometers tall.
Exactly. So the forum basically ruled that if the gods were going to use altitude and geological majesty as their primary jurisdictional credential,
then the Martian court simply had a taller credential.
Yep, they convened the full trial in a special caldera session on Olympus Mons itself.
The visual contrast of that must have been stunning. Just picture it. You have Zeus, the king of the gods, forced to sit in this vast, basalt-walled chamber where you can literally see the curvature of the planet out the window,
making his own sacred mountain look like a minor speed bump.
But wait, I have to push back here. Jurisdiction based on altitude. That sounds less like a legitimate legal strategy and more like, I don't know, a petty measuring contest between rival corporate managers.
It kind of is, yeah.
Like it's like one manager saying he is in charge of a project because his office is on the 80th floor while the other guy is stuck down on the 2nd floor. Why would Zeus even validate that?
What do you mean?
Well, he's supposedly the omnipotent king of the gods. Why validate a Martian court by showing up to a height measuring contest? Why not just ignore the summons entirely and keep forcing Sisyphus to push the rock?
That is a great question. And the answer is that Zeus shows up because of the inherent, unavoidable trap of absolute power.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning that power at that scale cannot resist defending its own ego.
Ah, so he literally couldn't help himself.
Exactly. If you are a deity whose entire existence and authority thrive on being recognized as supreme, ignoring a formal summons from a massive higher altitude court looks remarkably like weakness.
It looks like you're hiding.
Right. Zeus didn't show up because he respected the legal process. He showed up because he fundamentally believed he could just intimidate the room.
Oh, he thought he was going to walk in and own the place.
The Olympians expected to stroll into that caldera, generate some localized thunder, blind the gallery with their aura, and just have the entire case dismissed out of sheer trembling reverence.
They thought it was a PR event, basically, not a legal audit.
Exactly. They were entirely unprepared for a quiet clerk with a stylus, just asking them to produce a lawful schedule of enforcement.
Which takes us directly into the pre-trial proceedings, right? The record of examination under oath.
Yes. And this is the moment where the majestic facade of eternal damnation just really starts to splinter.
The deposition of Sisyphus is wild. It grounds the whole myth in such brutal reality.
Yeah, the text specifically notes his physical state.
He doesn't arrive looking like some tragic figure painted on a piece of ancient pottery, right? He is practically physically inflamed.
Right. His hands are severely damaged. His sleep cycles are completely shattered.
We are looking at the actual physiological consequences of pushing a massive rock up a steep incline for centuries.
And you have the state attorney for metaphysical enforcement sitting down across from him.
Oh yeah, just oozing confidence.
Right, ready to frame Sisyphus as this defiant, rebellious mortal who is unlawfully refusing his divine sentence.
So the prosecutor asks him a very simple question. He says, "Why did you stop?"
And Sisyphus's answer is an absolute masterclass in procedural devastation.
It really is.
He states, just flat out on the record, "The stone returned, no restart order was issued, I waited."
It is so clean, it completely bypasses all the grand philosophy and goes straight for the administrative jugular.
Right. Sisyphus basically exposes what Zyloth calls the scheduler defect.
The scheduler defect, let's dig into that.
So the scheduler defect is basically the core vulnerability of the entire Olympian system. Think about the actual mechanics of this specific punishment.
Okay, pushing the rock up, it rolls down.
Right. It relies entirely on continuous repetition. But repetition requires a defined restart mechanism.
Yes, someone has to say, do it again.
Exactly. And the prosecutor is flabbergasted by this. He tries to argue the obvious visual cue. He says, the boulder had returned to the foot of the mountain. That was the signal to begin again.
And Zyloth doesn't miss a single beat. He immediately objects and says, "Counsel is testifying on behalf of a rock."
Which is just an incredible line.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And the Martian judge actually sustains the objection.
Right. The judge formally rules that a boulder has not been qualified as a legal notice mechanism.
It's so funny to think about, but it makes perfect sense. It's exactly like a toxic boss.
How so?
Well, imagine a boss who yells at you to just keep working, but they never actually give you your shift schedule. So at 5 p.m., you clock out and go home. The next morning, the boss is screaming at you for not working the overnight shift. And you just calmly point out that nobody legally mandated you to be there overnight.
That's a perfect analogy.
But how does an entire pantheon of advanced, supposedly omniscient deities mistake a missing schedule for eternity? Like, how did they miss that?
They mistook it because they relied on the normalization of terror rather than the specificity of law.
Oh, wow. The normalization of terror.
Yeah, think about it. A punishment that lacks a defined restart mechanism is structurally incoherent. Who schedules the next cycle?
Right. Is it immediate?
Exactly. Is there a mandatory 5-minute rest period, a 10-year rest period?
Nobody knows.
And the prosecution tried to argue that it has always been understood that Sisyphus was supposed to immediately push the rock back up.
But as Zyloth methodically points out, understanding is not law.
Exactly. Custom is not specificity. Silence in a punitive order is not a blank check for the punisher to demand infinite labor.
That is profound. The gods built this entire eternal enforcement regime on the lazy assumption that their victims would simply be too exhausted and terrified to notice they forgot to write a proper contract.
Which is wild when you think about it.
It really is. So when Sisyphus points out this glaring clerical error, how does the management, mean the gods themselves, actually defend it? Because they do take the stand.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And the cross-examinations of the Olympian entourage are just breathtaking to read.
What's fascinating here is Zeus's testimony. Let's look at that first, because he embodies a very specific kind of executive failure.
He really does. Zeus is the ultimate visionary CEO who views paperwork as totally beneath him.
Yes.
His failure mode is relying entirely on what Zyloth calls executive weather.
Executive weather. I love that term.
Yeah. So when Zyloth asks Zeus to identify the specific written order that authorizes the eternal repetition of the punishment, Zeus is almost insulted.
Like, how dare you ask me for a memo?
Right. He just replies, "My will was known."
Which means absolutely nothing in a courtroom.
Exactly. To Zeus, ambiguity is actually a weapon. He genuinely believes that documenting his power diminishes it.
Because if he writes down a rule, he is bound by that rule.
Right. If he simply relies on his terrifying presence, his executive weather, he can change the rules whenever he wants.
But Zyloth presses him on this. He asks Zeus who this unwritten will was actually issued to.
And Zeus proudly declares, "To all who recognize Olympus."
And Zyloth delivers this crushing reality check. He just says, that is a constituency, not a filing address.
It's incredible.
It's like watching a massive celebrity influencer get dragged into a tax audit.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. The influencer keeps trying to pay the IRS with exposure and vibes, and the auditor is just sitting there with a calculator asking for a W-2.
Exactly. Zeus keeps trying to substitute thunderclaps and his glowing abdominal definition for actual jurisprudence.
He completely fails to understand that a legal system cannot run on mood swings.
It can't. And Zeus's failure is spectacular, but Hades' failure is far more insidious, actually.
Yeah, let's talk about Hades. Because if Zeus is the CEO who hates documents, Hades is basically the middle manager who has weaponized defective administration.
That is exactly what he is. Hades actually shows up to the court with ledgers.
Oh, right, the big books.
Yeah, the text notes that the gallery gasped when Hades produced these massive books. Because it looked like, in Zyloth's words, civilization had arrived in a black robe.
But those ledgers were a total smokescreen.
Completely. They track the intake of souls, the physical location of Sisyphus, his continuing assignment to the mountain.
But they completely lacked the one thing that actually mattered, the lawful restart specification.
Right. So when Zyloth interrogates Hades about where the restart interval is actually defined in these ledgers, Hades relies on institutional inertia. He claims the repetition is just inherent in the sentence.
And Zyloth pushes right back. He says, inherent where? In ink, in statute, in order, or in your confidence.
Such a good line. Hades tries to argue that the repetition is just in the nature of the punishment itself.
And Zyloth shuts it down with one line, nature has not been admitted as a clerk.
Which is brilliant. Hades is essentially trying to defend thousands of years of torture by calling it settled expectations.
Wait, what does that even mean legally? Settled expectations?
Well, legally settled expectations usually refers to the idea that if a law or a practice has been in place for a really long time, people rely on it.
Okay.
And upending it would cause chaos.
Yeah.
Like society expects things to work a certain way.
But Zyloth dissects how Hades is using that term, right?
Yeah. Zyloth defines settled expectations in this context as what powerful systems call defective practices once enough victims have grown too tired to object.
Wow. Just wow.
It is a genuinely chilling mechanism.
Yeah.
Hades isn't relying on a foundational law. He's relying on the psychological exhaustion of the condemned.
The mechanism of institutional decay here is normalization.
Exactly. A practice happens once without a lawful order, and it's an aberration. It happens 100 times, and it becomes custom.
And it happens for a millennium, and the institution calls it nature.
Right. The system basically relies on the victim's exhaustion to avoid auditing its own defective customs. Hades was running an archive of normalized deviance, just disguising a lack of procedure as ancient tradition.
That is so dark. Which brings us to Hermes.
Ah, Hermes.
If Hades is middle management, Hermes is basically the communications department.
That's a very accurate parallel.
And his testimony reveals how an institution can fatally misinterpret efficiency for legal validity.
Right, because Hermes testifies that he informed Sisyphus of the expectations efficiently.
And Zyloth has to patiently explain to a literal god that efficiency is not a medium of legal service.
Hermes' mechanism of failure is mistaking speed for service.
Right. He assumed that because the message of terror and consequence was delivered quickly and understood viscerally by Sisyphus, that the legal requirement of notice was somehow fulfilled.
It is the bureaucratic equivalent of sending a vague draft email, seeing that the recipient opened it.
With read receipts on.
Right, seeing the read receipt and assuming you now have a signed, legally binding contract just because you hit send really fast.
Understanding that a god is threatening you is not the same thing as receiving formal, lawful notice of a scheduled sentence.
It really isn't. And then we get to the Fury.
Oh man, the Fury. This is easily the darkest segment of the trial.
Yeah, it gets very heavy here.
Yeah.
Because the Fury represents the Enforcement and Compliance Division.
But her compliance is rooted entirely in cruelty, completely divorced from protocol.
Right. And Zyloth completely shifts his entire line of questioning here.
He stops asking about metaphysics and he starts asking about occupational hazards.
Which is just a brilliant pivot. He asks the Fury if she was trained in mountain labor safety.
And she proudly states she was trained in punishment.
So he asks for the ergonomic assessments, the medical reviews, the personal protective equipment logs.
And she responds, genuinely baffled, the punishment was intended to be burdensome.
To which Zyloth replies, burdensome is not a waiver of crushing hazards.
That is incredible. The legal maneuvering there is just brilliant. Zyloth strips away the magic, the curse, the whole mythology.
He forces the Martian court to look at Tartarus not as a realm of divine retribution, but as a hazardous workplace operating in flagrant violation of basic safety standards.
He essentially brings OSHA to the underworld.
He literally does.
Right.
The trial record lists the hazards of Sisyphus's environment with this clinical detachment.
Right, it lists steep, irregular terrain, continuous rolling hazard,
Severe dust exposure,
extreme heat,
and repetitive strain injury. And there is absolutely zero evidence of safety footwear, gloves, or a hydration protocol.
And the Olympian entourage was highly offended by this.
Oh, I bet.
They felt Zyloth was mocking them by asking about safety shoes. They thought he was, missing the grandeur of a divine curse.
But Zyloth is making a really profound mathematical point about the nature of eternity here.
Right, because the Olympians view eternity as this grand canvas for their justice. But Zyloth views eternity as a statistical multiplier.
Wait, explain that. A statistical multiplier. Okay, so if you have a worker perform a dangerous task once without gloves, that is negligence, right?
Right.
But if that task is ordered to happen forever, missing gloves isn't just a risk anymore.
Oh, I see.
It becomes a guarantee of severe permanent harm. Eternity amplifies the negligence. It makes every single microscopic administrative defect mathematically inevitable.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. I have to pause on the concept of punishment here, because this completely rewired how I view the justice system.
How so?
Well, We tend to accept that if someone is being punished, that they kind of lose the right to complain about the conditions.
Yeah, society generally views it that way.
But even in our modern reality, a maximum security prison still has to have fire exits.
That's a great point.
You cannot sentence a person to a fiery death just because the smoke alarms weren't in the state budget. A lawful punishment has to be the defined loss of liberty. It cannot be an open-ended subscription to random physical trauma. If you don't define the physical limits and provide basic safety protocols, it isn't justice. It's just forced, uncompensated labor disguised as divine will.
And that is exactly what Zyloth terms the divine competence problem.
A divine competence problem.
The gods claimed ultimate justice and perfect omniscience. Yet, when subjected to basic scrutiny, they couldn't even demonstrate the ordinary administrative competence of a mid-level construction foreman.
They literally didn't conduct a medical assessment for dust allergies.
Or joint degradation, before assigning a man to push a rock for eternity.
It sounds petty when you say it out loud, but it completely strips away their majesty.
It does. They were using words like order and justice when they really meant raw obedience and unmanaged cruelty.
And as this is happening, as the gods are stammering through these humiliating cross-examinations, something incredible is happening outside the courtroom.
Right, the environmental phenomena.
Yes. The text dedicates a significant amount of time to the Martian atmospheric phenomena occurring during the trial.
Which seems weird at first.
Very weird. Zyloth notes wild weather events happening outside the caldera. Static discharges are rippling through the dust.
Auroral veils shifting over the crustal magnetic anomalies.
And synchronized dust devils marching up the slope of Olympus Mons. Now, the Greek prosecution naturally points to the windows and calls it an omen.
Because to a god, every weather event is just a reflection of their own mood.
Exactly. But Zyloth looks at the exact same phenomena and calls it data.
He has this spectacular line: omens are what civilizations invent when they want interpretation without instrumentation.
Data is what remains after you disappoint the priests. I mean, come on, that is so good.
It is amazing.
But wait, I have to ask, why does Zyloth focus so heavily on the weather? Why is a legal advocate writing extensive notes about dust plasma escape and solar wind stripping while he's in the middle of dismantling the Olympian legal system?
It seems like a massive tangent.
Right, is he just getting distracted by shiny weather events?
No, it seems like a tangent until you understand how Zyloth synthesizes information.
Okay.
He is an immortal observer who thinks in systems. He doesn't separate physics from law. He looks at the ancient Martian atmosphere and hypothesizes about how it was lost.
Mars lost its atmosphere, yeah.
But it didn't lose its atmosphere passively in one tidy textbook event. It lost it through coupled cascading failures.
Okay, walk me through the physics of that and how it actually maps to what was happening inside the courtroom.
Right, so in the physical realm, sunlight ionizes the upper Martian atmosphere, turning it into plasma.
Right.
Normally, a planet's global magnetic field would protect that plasma.
Right.
But early Mars lost its global magnetic dynamo. The field dropped.
Okay.
That allowed the solar wind to slam directly into the unprotected atmosphere, physically stripping the plasma away into deep space. It was a failure of multiple protective fields simultaneously.
So basically, no magnetic shield means the solar wind just blasts the atmosphere away.
Exactly. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, map that physical mechanism to legal and institutional legitimacy.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Systems of power rarely collapse because of one single explosive event. They collapse when their protective fields drop.
And in a legal system, those protective fields are what? Due process?
Due process, safety standards, clear documentation, and coherent enforcement.
Oh, wow.
The Olympian system was built on the assumption that their global magnetic field, their terrifying prestige, would always protect them. But Zyloth acted as the solar wind.
He applied external, relentless scrutiny.
And because the gods had no underlying legal foundation, no documents, no safety records, no valid restart orders, they had no protective field left.
Precisely. Their legitimacy was being stripped away with every single question they failed to answer.
Right. The leaders of failing institutions always insist that the sudden drop in pressure is just ceremonial or a temporary glitch.
But Zyloth was sitting in that caldera, watching two atmospheres leak at the exact same time. The ancient sky of Mars outside, and the unquestioned legal pressure of the Olympians inside.
Zeus's thunder wasn't a protective field, it was just localized static.
That is a phenomenal metaphor. The gods were literally losing the atmosphere of their authority in real time.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the final verdict. The pressure drops to zero.
Yep.
The Martian court grants an interim stay. They demand that the Olympian Tartarian Enforcement Authority produce the original sentencing orders.
They demand the procedural rules, the restart cycle specifications, the personal protective equipment records, and the emergency evacuation plans.
Basically, they demand the receipts.
And of course, the Olympians could produce absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all. Zyloth describes their panicked attempts to fulfill the court's order as resembling, quote, a temple after an earthquake, if the earthquake had been caused by footnotes.
That is so descriptive. Because the gods could not prove that a valid, documented restart order existed, the court ruled that no lawful restart could be enforced.
The absence of a schedule meant the absence of an obligation. And just like that, the resting stone doctrine is born.
Sisyphus doesn't have to push the rock anymore. The stone could simply rest.
It's over.
But the physical boulder itself has this incredible epilogue in the text. It actually gets preserved as material evidence.
Yes. It is moved to a Martian museum annex and placed under a large sign that reads, "Objects that became arguments."
And the placard placed directly on the boulder is the most striking insight in the entire diary, I think.
I agree.
Because it doesn't say monument for occupational safety. It doesn't say monument to procedural specificity.
Right.
The placard reads, monument for freedom of speech.
We really need to linger on this because it completely reframed my entire understanding of what free speech actually is.
Same here. When we talk about free speech, we usually romanticize it, right?
We picture a brave dissident standing on a soapbox at a public square, yelling their opinions to the masses.
Or fiery newspaper editorials and revolutionary pamphlets.
But Zyloth strips all the romance and poetry out of it. He frames freedom of speech as the ultimate, legally binding reply-all to management.
I love that. He removes the decoration from the concept.
To Zyloth, free speech isn't fundamentally about the right to express your unique personality or to say agreeable, flattering things.
No. In its most raw, utilitarian form, free speech is simply the right to look at a hostile, overwhelming system that has the power to destroy you and say, show me the order.
Show me the paperwork.
Exactly. It is the right to demand that power justify its actions through documentation and law, rather than just forcing you to accept its coercion.
The Boulder is a monument to free speech because a single condemned man used dull, bureaucratic procedure to interrupt cosmic inevitability.
He didn't give a grand speech about the human spirit. He forced absolute power to answer a small, specific question about scheduling.
Right. There is a line in the text, arrogance becomes brittle when made to explain itself.
And the museum curators even left the face of the stone entirely unpolished. They kept the rough, jagged ridge where Sisyphus had to brace his shoulder for centuries.
Because, as Zyloth notes, polishing the stone would have made it decorative. And it wasn't decorative to the person being crushed by it.
So true. So Sisyphus wins. The rock stops moving.
He wins.
But the fallout from this one isolated victory creates the single thing that massive institutions fear more than anything else in the universe.
Precedent.
Precedent. A powerful institution can handle a single rebel. You can isolate one person, you can punish them severely, you can turn their suffering into a cautionary tale for everyone else.
But a legal doctrine cannot be isolated. A legal doctrine travels.
And the Resting Stone Doctrine panicked the Pantheon because it exposed a systemic vulnerability that applied to their entire operation.
Which leads to the immediate chaotic aftermath of the trial, a class action motion.
Oh, yes. Or, as Zyloth notes for the Continental lawyers reading his diaries, the collective redress proceeding.
Once Sisyphus proved the system was defective, it just opened the floodgates for every other mythological victim who was suffering under a vague, eternal sentence.
The roster of potential claimants that join this motion is just incredible.
You have Prometheus filing motions, demanding to know the legal parameters of avian recidivism.
Avian recidivism. He wants to know if having his liver eaten daily by a giant eagle had ever been formally reviewed for proportionality by an independent board.
Right. You have Tantalus raising complex issues about deprivation conditions and the legality of permanent hydration denial.
Ixion is suddenly questioning the safety certifications and maintenance logs of his spinning wheel of fire.
The Danaids are demanding to see the metaphysical water retention certificates for the defective buckets they've been forced to fill.
It is genuinely hilarious to picture these ancient, terrifying punishments being bogged down in compliance paperwork.
It really is.
But the Martian court abruptly declined to hear the class certification. They just shut it down.
Yeah, they did.
Why? After being so bold with Sisyphus, why did the court suddenly back off when everyone else stepped up?
Well, the official, stated reasons for the denial were shrouded in dense legal jargon. The court cited a lack of standing, issues with metaphysical manageability,
Whatever that means.
and the need to preserve narrative stability.
Wait, narrative stability? Does that mean the Martian court was legally afraid of destroying the literal fabric of human folklore?
That is exactly what it means. If they let everyone go, the myths disappear.
Wow.
The court realized that if they certified this class action, it wouldn't just be a lawsuit. As Zyloth described it, it would be an archaeological event with subpoenas.
Because if you force the gods to justify every single myth with proper safety protocols and restart schedules, the entire architecture of divine mythology collapses under procedural review.
The court was terrified of destabilizing what they called settled mythological reliance interests.
There's that phrase again, settled expectations.
Yes. The court ultimately decided that the universe relied on these stories functioning the way they always had, even if the underlying legal mechanics were deeply abusive.
Zyloth vividly describes the scene when the denial was issued, right?
Yeah, the paperwork was pushed through unusually fast. And he notes that several attendees in the gallery smelled faintly of ambrosia and panic.
So behind closed doors, the gods were terrified.
The term systemic exposure was apparently used in a sealed memo.
So the court basically told the Olympians, look, we're going to pay out this one guy, Sisyphus, we're letting him go, but we will kill the class action so you don't all go bankrupt.
Just fix your paperwork going forward.
It is the cosmic equivalent of a massive corporate settlement wrapped tightly in a non-disclosure agreement. You pay off the squeaky wheel to protect the machine.
It is a dark compromise, but,
Yeah.
It secured Sisyphus's freedom.
It did. The text outlines his current status, actually.
Yeah, he was fully rehabilitated. He was awarded substantial damages for the uncompensated labor and the safety violations.
And he is currently living on a pension in a very quiet solar system, 690 light years away from Earth.
With a strict homeowners association covenant that explicitly bans the presence of boulders in the residential zone.
I love that detail. Zyloth jokes that this proves civilization is actually possible as long as lawyers are allowed to zone the geography.
And there's a really poignant final detail in the diaries.
Oh, about the interstellar relay.
Yeah, Zyloth mentions that occasionally Sisyphus will use an interstellar relay to call him up.
And what does he ask?
Sisyphus will ask, just out of curiosity, if the Olympians ever actually went back and defined the scheduler for the rock.
Did they ever fix the paperwork?
Yeah, exactly, and Zyloth tells him no, they never did.
And when Sisyphus hears that, he just laughs.
Zyloth notes that it is a quiet, steady laugh. It is the sound of a man who has finally learned that rest, just like punishment, can become a habit.
The mental conditioning is broken. He stepped off the cycle.
He really did. He broke a multi-millennial cycle of torture simply by asking for the paperwork.
It is an incredible paradigm shift. We have taken a story that for thousands of years has been used to teach humans to just lower their heads, push the rock, and accept the absurd, futile burdens of life.
And Zyloth has revealed it to be a story about the absolute fundamental necessity of demanding accountability.
It dismantles the romance of suffering. We are often taught that enduring hardship without complaint makes us noble.
But this text tells us that when a massive institution, whether it's a workplace, a government, or a pantheon of gods, looks at you and says, this is just how things are.
You have the absolute right to ask if how things are has a lawful basis, a defined process, and respect for human dignity.
Absolutely.
Which brings me to a final thought I want you to sit with today. Zyloth mentions early in his diaries that institutions rely heavily on exhaustion to prevent challenge.
Right.
The true genius of the Olympian punishment wasn't the physical weight of the boulder. The real punishment for Sisyphus was the mental conditioning that tricked him into believing he didn't even deserve a logical reason for his labor.
He was simply too exhausted, day after day, to notice the glaring administrative defect in his own damnation.
So think about the systems you operate within. What invisible boulders are you pushing in your own life right now?
That's a great question to ask yourself.
Maybe it's a toxic dynamic at work, an unreasonable expectation in a relationship, or a societal norm that just completely drains you.
Are you pushing that rock simply because that's how things are?
Right. And you've been too exhausted by the daily grind to stop, drop your shoulders, and ask the system, where's the order?
Arrogance, at any level, relies entirely on our silence and our fatigue.
It really does. So the next time you find yourself standing at the bottom of a steep mountain, looking up at a crushing burden, don't just marvel at the terrifying majesty of the peak.
Zoom in. Look at the dirt.
Ask for the safety assessment, ask for the shift schedule, because sometimes the grandest, most intimidating cathedrals of authority are just hiding a missing piece of paper.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Zyloth Diaries. Stay curious, keep asking those small disruptive questions that make arrogance brittle, and we'll catch you on the next one.